Welcome to Mineral Talks Live, the monthly live mineral webinar that brings you in-depth and in-person interviews with mineral people from around the world. Mineral Talks Live is brought to you by a joint effort among the Mineralogical and Geological Museum at Harvard University, the SMMP, and Blue Cap Productions. Tune in on the first Wednesday of every month and stay connected to your mineral world. Now, broadcasting live from beautiful Honolulu, Hawaii, the land of aloha, ukuleles, and shakas, this is Mineral Talks Live. Aloha, everyone, and welcome to Mineral Talks Live on the second Wednesday of the month. Again, our apologies for having to change the date, but all of us were traveling last week and we just couldn't make the show happen. But we're glad that you're with us here now. For those of you joining for the first time, Mineral Talks Live is the monthly mineral talk show where we sit down with people from all facets of the mineral world to learn more about what they do and who they are. Our guests include some of the best curators, collectors, dealers, miners, researchers, artists, and media people in the mineral world. I'm Brian Swoboda, the president of Blue Cap Productions, and together with my two extraordinary partners, Dr. Raquel Alonso Perez from the Mineralogical and Geological Museum at Harvard University, and Dr. Eloise Gaillou from the Society of Mineral Museum Professionals, also known as SMMP, and I usually mess up the acronym, not the name of the place. We want to welcome you to the 65th episode of Mineral Talks Live. Now, if you want to see a complete list of all our past guests and link to those interviews, please click the URL at the bottom of the screen, and don't forget to click the subscribe button. One of the things that makes this program so unique is that it isn't just a conversation between me and our guests. All of you are part of the show when you participate through the chat or the Q&A feature, both of which are located at the bottom of your Zoom window. The chat feature allows you to type messages to everyone watching the live show. If you have thoughts, comments, or questions about what we're discussing, this chat area is where you can post them and interact with each other while we're talking. Usually our guests and I aren't able to read those comments, but Raquel and Eloise will be very active in the chat area and may even interject a question or two to us during the interview. But what if you have a general question you're dying to ask, but it's a bit off the topic of what we're discussing at the moment? In that case, feel free to type your question into the Q&A section, and we'll do our best to get to that at the end of the show. Finally, towards the end of the program, you'll see a window pop up on your screen. This is our quick fire 5 questions, where we'll get to see how well all of you know our guests. Try your luck, but be warned that if you get all of the questions wrong, you are required to buy our guest a drink the next time you see him at a mineral show. Now, on to today's show. As far back as I can remember, my father always had a certain mineral magazine in the house. He would quickly read it cover to cover whenever it arrived in our mailbox. I'd find him always referring back to old issues of the magazine, like a much-used encyclopedia. And much like National Geographic for the rest of the world, there was always a space on his bookshelves for copies of this magazine. I'm speaking, of course, about the Mineralogical Record. And I know that this story isn't unique just to my father. A bunch of you out there are just like that. Now, where would we be without it? I honestly remember years ago, it must have been back in the late 90s, going out to lunch in Los Angeles with my father, where we were joined by Wendell Wilson and Thomas Moore, both from the MinRec. I was working in the advertising world at the time, and I was doing a lot of video production for our clients. Wendell and I started talking about what if someone started making films for the mineral world, and we both started getting really excited about the idea. Now, I never forgot that feeling, so about 10 years later, when I started Blue Cap Productions in 2007, those thoughts were still fresh in my mind. By 2010, Blue Cap Productions had reached a small level of success when something happened that changed Blue Cap Productions. In 2010, I was able to form a partnership with the Mineralogical Record, and I placed the first DVD video into the magazine. Now, over the next 22 years, Blue Cap Production has partnered with the Mineralogical Record to place well over 50 films into its cover, in a tradition that continues to this very day. In fact, if you look at the masthead of the magazine, you'll see Blue Cap Productions and Brian Swoboda listed as the associate filmmaker. And this to me is an extremely high honor. And if you look at the other side of the masthead, you'll see the founder of the Mineralogical Record being listed as John Sampson White. And that is exactly who our guest is on today's program. He's a field collector, a field geologist, the former curator in charge at the Smithsonian Museum, and, of course, the founder of the Mineralogical Record. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John White to our show. Hey, John, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic. How's the weather out there? You're out kind of in the Maryland area, correct?
Just above Maryland and Pennsylvania, not far north of Maryland, the Maryland line.
Terrific. Now, John, as you know, I always like to start my interview with asking our guests about what was the earliest exposure to minerals that you remember having. Crank that brain of yours way back and tell us about the first time you were introduced to minerals and how that felt and what that did for you.
Well, that's an easy one, except that some of the details are missing because my memory isn't what I would like it to be. But when I was in the 8th grade, we were challenged, each student was challenged to put together a mineral set of some sort. I don't remember how that was done, but that was my first introduction to minerals, and I stayed crazy about them ever since.
Now, do you remember as you were assembling that set, what was the one mineral or series of minerals that most excited you?
Oh, I don't remember. I'm sorry. I have no recollection whatsoever of any individual minerals in that set.
Okay, all right.
I wish I had kept it, but I didn't.
Now, John, I think one thing you can universally say about all mineral people is that we all believe in the importance of mentors. You had a very early mentor who influenced you in many ways. Tell us about how your relationship with Paul Desautels started and how that led you to the Smithsonian.
Your voice got a little faint there at the end. Is that something to be concerned about? I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm still here, so
no,
obviously I haven't stroked out, so I guess we're okay.
All right. Once again, some details have gone away, but the interesting thing is that somehow or other I found out that Paul Desautels was a chemistry teacher at Teachers College, which was just a short bicycle ride from where I lived at the time in Maryland. And so I went up there one time on my bike and introduced myself to Paul, and we became fast friends. Paul at the time was a very active micromounter.
Okay.
And he used to have sessions with Lou Yetman, who was known at the time as Mr. Micromount. He was famous worldwide for his micromounting. And Lou Perloff, Neil Yetman. And Paul would invite these two gentlemen to his home and me, and we would sit at a round table and with microscopes and look at micro mounts all evening and talk, of course, about minerals. And so it was that connection with Paul that turned out to be fortuitous later on. If you are curious about that detail, let me know.
Well, no, absolutely, because from being a micromount collector and a teacher at kind of a local college, Paul ended up at the Smithsonian,
Yes.
which kind of led you there. So tell us about that.
Well, the first part is a great mystery to me. I don't know how Paul wormed his way into the museum, but he was hired as a curator in mineralogy. And at the time, the chair of the department was George Switzer. They were both very interested in minerals of all sorts, of the mineral collection at the Smithsonian. They were devoted to that collection, both of them. And I guess that Switzer recognized in Paul someone who shared his love of minerals. In any case, Paul ended up as a curator. I went on to graduate work at the University of Arizona. And after I finished my master's program, I was working for American Smelting and Refining Company and doing field work looking for copper deposits. Mm-hmm. And I got a letter in the mail from Paul one day saying there's an opening for a technician in mineral sciences. I strongly suggest that you apply for it. And of course, I didn't need much encouragement. And it was a given that Paul would see that I would get the job. So in 1963, I was hired. I moved to Maryland, and I was there until 91 when I retired.
You were there until 91. So yeah, I never had the connection that Paul was the one who wrote you a letter and said that there was a position. And then that's what led you to the Smithsonian. So you had obviously been in touch with Paul during your time when he had gone off to the Smithsonian and you had gone to school and then graduate school, U of A, and then the smelters.
Yeah, and what I saw Paul, he used to come out to Tucson for the shows. Okay. And I would see him then and spend some time with him. So we kept our relationship alive right up until he invited me to apply for a job at the Smithsonian.
So now you're part of the Smithsonian, and while you were there, you're still very active in the mineral collecting world, but you became very frustrated at the I guess we can call it the inadequacy of the literature for mineral collectors.
Oh, that's an understatement. If anybody knows what rocks and minerals was at the time, you'll understand my frustration.
Well, now describe that to us, and we all understand that that is not the way that Rocks and Minerals is right now. It's a great magazine run by Marie and Terry, but kind of unravel that a little bit so that we have a picture into what it was like back then.
Well, it was a magazine that reported new mineral finds for pebbles in streams and things like that. That's about as technical as it got, and it was just, it really was of zero interest to anyone who was serious about minerals. And the owners were the Bournes, and I even wrote to them and volunteered that I would be willing to do what I could to try to make it a better magazine, and they totally ignored my invitation. They never even responded. So that added to my frustration, and it wasn't too much longer that I decided that I was trying to start my own magazine.
So the owners of Rocks and Minerals, they were feeling very passionately that there were many streams and pebbles yet to explore, and you felt a very urgent need to create a totally different kind of magazine. Unravel what you had in your mind in terms of what the ideal magazine would be, and then the people and the steps that you took to actually create this.
I wanted a magazine for mineral collectors, basically. The American Mineralogist was too technical for most collectors, and there was really nothing else out there. So I envisioned a magazine that would satisfy their desire to learn more about minerals and mineral localities, and so essentially that's pretty much it.
So this was late 60s, and it's one thing to have the idea, and it's another thing to actually get around to creating something. Bridge that gap for me. Who helped
Well,
you? How did you go about it?
that's a very long story. I Number one, I was extremely fortunate in being at the museum where I had contact to virtually every active mineral dealer at the time.
Okay.
And developed a friendship with virtually all of those people. But geez, it's such a long story. But I had number one, there was no way in the world that I could afford to start a magazine on my own, so that meant that I had to find funding. And at that point, Richard Bideau, who was a very dear friend of mine, he became very active because he was very close to Arthur Montgomery. Arthur Montgomery, the famous American mineral professor at Lehigh University at the time. Was a very well-known mineral collector, but he shared my interest in creation of a publication that would serve collectors, and so he was also interested in an organization which he developed called the Friends of Mineralogy, and so Dick Bideau invited a bunch of mineralogists to his home in Tucson, late 60s, and Arthur Montgomery was there, and we all made a pitch for a magazine along the lines of what I envisioned. And at that point, thanks to Richard's activism, Arthur agreed to finance it for the first couple of years, with a diminishing subsidy after that for a while, and assuming he liked what he was subsidizing. So Arthur made fairly substantial demands on what he wanted the magazine to be, and they were for the most part in line with what I had in mind anyway. He also wanted the Friends of Mineralogy to have an active role in the nature of the publication, and that the members of the Friends of Mineralogy were to submit articles, and the Mineralogical Record was to agree to publish those. That was not a problem, so all went smoothly. Arthur came through with the initial subsidy, and because of that, I was able to start a magazine, which was kind of interesting because I had no experience in publishing. I had no experience in editing. I didn't know much about the business world, so I was about as green could be.
Yeah, but why let that stop you?
Well, there were a lot of interesting breaks along the way that made it possible. For example, just as an example, one comes to mind. I lived in a community where most of my neighbors were close friends. And when in the early years of the Mineralogical Record, when the the number of subscribers was relatively small, I had neighbors who would come in and help pack the magazines for shipping and help take them to the post office and all sorts of things. right? Like that. I mean, that's just one example. I got kind of amazing support. Um, Martin Ehrman, whom you knew,
Yes.
was the first person to buy a full page ad in the magazine. Martin was he was the most prominent mineral dealer in the world at that time.
Indeed.
And Martin and I were very, very good friends.
Now, you did a trip with Martin out to Europe at about that time. Isn't that correct?
That was 67, yes. I had, after I graduated from college, I was drafted in the Army. And there's so much serendipity involved here. It's amazing. But during basic training, after basic training, I was sent to cryptography school for some reason. I have no idea why. And the religious presence at that school was he a graduate of the same college that I went to, so we became friends. And he was friendly with a sergeant who had a lot to say about where soldiers were sent after they finished cryptography school. And I told him I really, really, really wanted to go to Europe. And Europe was a plum only for those volunteers who signed up for 3 years in the military. And as I was a draftee, I only had to do 2 years in the military, and there was no way in hell that I could have hoped to get to Europe. But because of this relationship with this man, I ended up being sent to Germany, which was just fantastic. I enjoyed every minute of it. But yeah. I bought a car over there, and I drove all over much of Europe in that car. And so Martin knew that I had experience driving around Europe. So he asked me if I would be his driver for 5 weeks in Europe in a brand new BMW. And so, that was an amazing experience. Martin, being such a prominent mineral dealer, so experienced in the trade, just to be with him for 5 weeks. Well, I was never invited to witness his negotiations, but we talked a lot about what he was doing. And so, what's happening?
Oh, you're fine.
Oh, somebody's calling. Okay. So anyway, I've forgotten where we started.
Yeah, so that must have been like a master class in mineral collecting as you're traveling around with Martin Yerman, driving him for weeks around Europe in your brand new BMW. And for those who are not familiar with Martin Yerman, as John was saying, he was the major mineral dealer at the time, the biggest, the best. He had offices here in America, but oftentimes he would go to Europe and he would travel around Europe and do his wheeling and dealing and bring these pieces back to America and sell them in America. He was based for a while in New York, but eventually he moved his offices to Los Angeles, and he ended up having his headquarters in West Hollywood, above a jewelry factory that was actually owned by my father. And so he was my father's tenant at my father's commercial building. And every time Martin would come back from Europe, my mom would have almost a heart attack because she knew that my dad was going to go see him before everyone else and look through the pieces and find out which pieces my dad wanted for his own personal collection.
I need to modify that slightly because
Okay.
Martin went straight to the Smithsonian, and as he entered the mineral room, he was chuckling because he was anticipating how excited we would be about the minerals that he was going to show us. And then he would open his briefcase and he'd pull out these incredible things that he had acquired from museums in Europe.
Sure.
And then and these were all being offered for sale to us, of course. And he invited George Switzer and Paul Desautel and myself to estimate what we thought he would price these minerals at. Mm-hmm. And our estimates were always higher than what he asked for these minerals. And and then he would invite everybody to lunch, and we'd have a wonderful lunch. And this was a routine, So we actually had first shot at everything that we got here.
Now, and that makes a lot of sense. And I know we're kind of going off the subject, but heck, that's what we're here for, John. At around that time in the early 70s, that's when the big blue cap pocket was found at the Tourmaline Queen mine. And as we all know, probably the greatest piece from that pocket was the candelabra that ended up in the Smithsonian. Now, you were at the Smithsonian at the time. I've never heard the story of, kind of from the museum's perspective, what that experience was like. Is there any light that you can shed on that?
Well, the most I think I can come up with is the fact that we got it from Bill Larson,
mm-hmm. Who was partners with my father at the time. They were partners in properties.
We first saw it. Bill, after he hit that particular pocket of blue caps, he had a huge lawn party that Paul and I were invited to, and that's where we first saw the candelabra. And of course, there was no question but what Paul would want that for the museum. Paul always thought big, thought large. He wanted the best of everything that was available at the time.
Sure. Yeah.
In fact, at shows, many of them, I probably won't say most, but many of the top dealers would always hold things under the counter for Paul because they knew he had a reputation for buying the best. And they wanted him to have the first shot at the very best things that they had.
Absolutely. And that was the same for that blue cap pocket. And I think last time I was at Smithsonian, I was always impressed by the fact that the candelabra and the steamboat, both from the same mountain, Queen Mountain, were in relative close proximity to the Hope Diamond, which to me was always a real big feather for the mineral world's cap. And speaking of the Hope Diamond, John, I need some backstory on this image. This is the only image I've ever seen of a gentleman who, at least I know, wearing the Hope Diamond. Tell me about this.
Well, the Hope Diamond had a reputation for being cursed. And it is said that everyone who ever touched the Hope Diamond died. Well, most of those were old characters who would have passed away anyway. But we poo-pooed that curse, and everyone in the department had their picture taken wearing it. And of course, it doesn't fit around my neck. It was held together with a paper clip in the back or something like that, because the necklace wasn't quite long enough to go around my neck.
Or as some people would say, you were just too thick-necked to.
You could say that. Right. Thank you for that.
Well, John, let's go back
So,
to this 1970. The first issue of the Mineralogical Record comes out. What
mhm.
was the public's reaction to that?
Well, it was disappointing in a way because we had to decide, uh, just without any understanding of what we were doing. We had to decide how many copies we felt should be printed and what we could afford. So we settled on 5,000 copies, and of those we sent a lot of freebies out to various mineralogists and museums and universities, in hopes that people having received these free copies would want to subscribe. Well, a disappointing number actually subscribed, but let's see. Uh, yeah, eventually, the number of subscribers became significant, and by the time Wendell Wilson took over the editorship, and that's another story. The number of subscribers was enough that he could draw a salary.
Cool.
And
Now, John, it's hard for a lot of people to imagine, but when this first came out, all of the pages were in black and white. And it wasn't until I think issue 16 that you had your first color plates inside the magazine, and then eventually
it was volume 6, number 5. Actually, I don't know if that works out to 16. I don't know how you got 16, but
oh, I just guessed.
yeah, that was the first color inside the magazine. That was just one article on radioactive crystals.
So how did that happen?
Like that.
Did the subscribership increase, or did you get some kind of donation or grant from somebody that allowed
well,
you
we had a little more money to play with, so we decided to include one article in color with that particular issue. I don't think we were getting a lot of complaints from subscribers because it was all black and white. I think they were perfectly happy with what they were getting. But we wanted to introduce color, and we did, as much as we could, as much as we could afford. It was expensive compared to black and white, of course.
Sure. Now, John, tell me about the cover image to the first edition. I know that Paul was a passionate micro mounter. Did that have something to do with you choosing this first cover?
I don't know. I don't think Paul was even consulted. I'm pulling out the issue here.
Well, it sounded like you were falling.
Well, I don't remember the details. That was a long time ago. But the subscription. It was gypsum from Pennsylvania, from Cornwall Iron Mine, which isn't terribly far from where I live.
So it might have been
and the
just about the
cluster
structure of it.
I'm sorry?
It might have been something just about the structure or the way that it looked, that it felt to be a
It
very.
was available. Look, we were using what we could get our hands on at the time, and that photograph was available. The cluster is only 2 millimeters in size. I don't think. Well, I don't know. I'd have to go back and look through the various magazines. It was probably a long time after that before we used a picture of a micromount on the cover, but I wouldn't swear by that.
Okay. All right. Now, John, in the early days of the Minrec, it was filled with participation with people that we consider today like mineral legends. I mean, you have Paul Desautels, Art Montgomery, Richard Bedeau, Peter Embry, and it's kind of like a who's who of minerals. So I would love to kind of get your perspective on what it was like working with those incredible individuals back then.
Oh, it was educational. I mean, both Peter Embry and Dick Bedeau sent me letters after the first issue detailing all the things that they found wrong with the first issue. And I was the sole editor. And so I had to review everything without any experience in editing. So, it wasn't surprising to me that they found a lot of typos and a lot of things. Peter Embry, in particular, fussed about the fact that one article was continued from back to front.
Okay.
But Peter was a very good friend, and both Dick and Peter in their critiques always ended up with please don't take this personally, don't be offended. Our comments are intended to be helpful. And what they contributed, but nobody contributed nearly as much as Dick Bedeau. I don't think, I think the magazine would not have been able to start without Dick Bedeau's support. And that's also true of the glossary, which we decided to publish, which I decided to publish after Mike Fleischer came to me and asked if I would publish it. And I was stunned that he would trust me with something like that. And Dick Bedeau, with his computer skills, did all the typesetting for that.
And that's for
as
the
a
Fleischer
freebie.
glossary, which is still used. I think the 2022 edition was just released. I actually asked a friend of mine to pick up a copy for me at the Denver show. So that's still going. And that was a major feather in
It's
your
the Bible. Oh, yes. Yeah. However, the Mineralogical Record lost money on the last printing, so it's been adopted by the Canadian Mineral Society, the publishers of the Canadian Journal. They're doing an excellent job, I'm sure, and so it will continue
it needs to stay in
appear
print.
every 4 years.
Yeah. It definitely needs to stay in print. So, John, in about 1984, Paul Desautels decides to leave the Smithsonian, and you're promoted to curator in charge. Now, there's a big leap from curator technician to curator in charge. I mean, that's an enormous leap. How did that happen? Talk to us about that.
Well, it was gradual. It. I was hired as a technician, and the museum made it abundantly clear over and over again that without a PhD, I could never be a curator.
Mm-hmm.
And so after the third issue of the Mineralogical Record, Paul took the magazine up to the office of the president of the Natural History Museum and said, "Don't you think that, given what you see here, that Mr. White should be made a curator?" And against all odds, it happened. I was appointed a curator, and Paul and I were both curators over a period of years at same time. And then Paul didn't decide to leave. Paul was fired.
Oh, here comes the dirt. Let's dig into it.
Well, Paul wasn't the most honest individual on the planet, and he got caught up wheeling and dealing in ways that he shouldn't have, and so he was invited to leave. And rather than be fired, he opted to leave on his own instead of a messy firing. And it's I don't know. Similar thing happened at Houston. Paul was hired at Houston, and he got in trouble, and he was pushed out the door at Houston. So two major museums essentially fired this man who's the most famous curator in this country.
Well, I mean, I would say possibly in his defense, he had big visions. And sometimes people with big visions can't always stay within the lanes.
Yeah, well, he pushed the envelope in every way imaginable.
Totally.
But you're right. He made major accomplishments, and the museum acquired some extraordinary specimens through his efforts and collections. We got the Carl Bosch collection from Yale University simply because Paul outmaneuvered the folks at Yale, and that collection was extraordinary. That is. Should be considered one of the finest personal collections ever assembled. It's that good.
Well, John, let me ask you this. What was the status of the overall Smithsonian collection prior to Paul stepping in versus after he had left his mark there? I mean, including the Bosch collection. Was that like one of the huge jump forwards in terms of overall quality of the collection?
Oh, absolutely. George Switzer was not at all active in terms of acquisition.
George was the curator in charge prior to Paul.
He was a chair of the department when Paul was hired and when I was hired. And George was not terribly active. He was content just to occupy a chair, I think. And, he was a nice guy, very easy to get along with and everything. But but it wasn't until Paul arrived that the acquisition program really took off.
Interesting. And so other than the Bosch collection, was there another major collection that the museum acquired during Paul's time?
Oh boy.
Don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, none that comes to mind, and certainly nothing of the magnitude of the Bosch collection. But I don't remember a major collection. There were any number of minor collections that were acquired. And minor in terms of the number of specimens, not necessarily the quality of the specimens.
Yeah. So, John, you step in. You're now the curator in charge. Um, you, I think prior, the Smithsonian always had a policy that no PhD, no person could be a curator without a PhD. You didn't. You said earlier you did not have a PhD. You then became curator in charge, and at the same time, you had to leave the mineralogical record. Unravel that a little bit, if you wouldn't mind.
No, I didn't leave the mineralogical records. The other way, I had to leave. Well, at the time that Wendell Wilson became the editor of the magazine, at about that time, I was forced to give up my connection with the magazine. I was
Because of your position at the museum.
Yeah, and this is all fallout from the things that Paul did.
Okay.
Everybody who had was participating in any activity that might have been perceived as illegal or unfortunate.
Or let's just say not on the straight and narrow.
Yeah. So they thought that my connection with the mineralogical record could be perceived as inappropriate. And so they decided that I better disconnect myself from the mineralogical record, which meant that I lost, among other things, $10,000 a year from the magazine. The magazine was doing that well at that time.
Wow.
It could afford to pay Wendell. And in addition to that, it could pay me $10,000 a year as the founder. And I was still the chief editor, although Wendell had really was doing most of the editing at that point. Wendell was not a trained editor either, but he's a very good, just the same.
Oh no, he's incredible. Now, Wendell was working with you in a certain capacity at the Mineralogical Record before he stepped in as the editor, was he not? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, but Wendell was doing almost everything. My $10,000 was coming from the fact that I was the founder. And, and I think that was even proposed by Wendell. But I honestly, I can't remember.
Yeah.
We had a very good relationship. The fact that he kind of snuck his way.
I think we're starting to get a weak internet control from you, John,
of the magazine. But
okay, maybe it's better now. I didn't hear that last comment that you were making about Wendell.
Well, he's sort of, it seems, like I woke up one morning and suddenly he was in charge totally.
Well, I mean, he has done a wonderful job. For a high-end minerals, I don't know where the mineral collecting community would be without the Mineralogical Record. And as I said earlier in my monologue, the success of Blue Cap Productions, a lot of it, I thank the Mineralogical Record for being so open and being such a great partner for me and helping to promote my company and what I was doing. So
I don't know where the Mineralogical Record would be today without Wendell.
Absolutely.
Up until recently, my chief concern, and that of lots of people, was what happens when Wendell can't do it anymore or doesn't want to do it anymore. There just isn't anybody out there who can begin to do what Wendell's doing. And then we found Chris Stefano.
Yes.
And he seems like, a blessing. Now, Wendell's still heavily involved, of course, but Chris, I understand, I've been told, is a fast learner, and he's really talented, and he's dedicated to minerals, which is important.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
we're looking forward.
I think the magazine's in good hands. And
absolutely, we're looking forward to what Chris is going to do with the magazine. Now, John, when you started the magazine, did you have any idea that you might be creating something that would become so iconic for the mineral world? Or, I mean, was it just kind of a crazy itch that you had to scratch?
Well, I didn't envision anything like the magazine has become. Mm-hmm. I envision something more like Rocks and Minerals under Marie Heising has become. That's much closer to my vision, much closer.
Gotcha.
However, there's room for both.
Absolutely, there is.
I think Marie is doing an extraordinary job, and I wonder about her. She's losing her eyesight.
We all are.
Well, not to that degree, my friend. But she seems pretty sanguine about the Rocks and Minerals continuing beyond her, and I don't understand that, because I think it's a huge threat. I think we were lucky to get Chris, but if we hadn't, then Chris might be replacing Marie.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed that Marie finds her own Chris in time. Now, John, you may see a window that have popped up on your screen. Just ignore that. That's our poll that we normally throw out. We're getting close to the end of the show, but I have one more kind of comment question for you. In February of 2020, right before we went into the pandemic, you were the first recipient of a new award called the John S. White Legacy Award. And that award was created to honor you and your contribution to the mineral world. Tell us your thoughts about that and how that felt.
Oh, I was overwhelmed. As you can imagine, it was something that I didn't see coming. And if it weren't for the Spans, it wouldn't have happened. It was their idea, and they brought it to fruition. I'm just. I just, I hardly know what to say. It's just too much, really. It's a lot to have on your plate, and
well, I know it feels overwhelming because it's really a great honor. But I can tell you, speaking for the entire mineral community, that you are so deserving of it, and the generosity of Gail and Jim Spann to put together this award, and it's going to be awarded every year to someone else who has made an incredible contribution to the mineral world. I mean, I was there and I filmed it, and I'll actually put a link to that video in this video when we post it. But to be able to have you around and honor you with such an award is just a great. It's a fantastic thing. Just as much as having you on the show while you're still here, so that we could actually interact and not talk about you in hindsight. So congratulations, well deserved, and thank you again for being on the show. Really love it, man.
Oh, Brian, thank you for inviting me. It's been interesting.
Well, you've had an interesting life, and I want to say it's funny because nowadays we talk about the legends of the mineral world, and we were talking about some of them early: Paul Desautels, Art Montgomery, even John White. But the interesting thing is, I think at the time of everyone's prime, you weren't considered the legends. You guys were just doing what you felt needed to be done, and in the fullness of time, you became the legends that you are. And so, I love the fact that we have a program such as Mineral Talks Live, where we can bring on people such as you to really honor them and to get some backstories that maybe you wouldn't hear elsewhere. Well, John, we're coming to the end of the show, so I'm going to do a bunch of what we call the quick fire 5 questions. I'm going to ask 5 questions. Each question has 2 answers. And what I'm looking for you to do is to respond to which answer you resonate with the strongest. All of the viewers have already guessed what you're going to say, and then we're going to see how well they guessed what you're going to say. All of your answers are correct. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Question number 1, the age-old battle: dogs or cats?
Oh, dogs.
Dogs.
Dogs for me. Yes, definitely.
Okay. Question number 2, single crystals or matrix specimens?
Oh, that's not fair. I like them all. Do I have to pick one?
You have to pick one. Sorry to do that to you.
Well, I have what I consider an important single crystal collection, and that's the only collection still remaining of sold or has sold most of the rest, all the rest, in fact. So single crystals.
Single crystals. When are you going to put those on display?
That's not going to happen.
Come on. We got to see them someday. Maybe when I come out and visit you, I'll record them, and we can make a little video about it.
Hey, I'm up for that.
Terrific. All right. Question number 3. What keeps your tootsies covered? Sandals or shoes?
Sandals.
Sandals. Question number 4. Cabin in the mountains or cottage by the sea?
Cottage by the sea.
Cottage by the sea. And the final and last question. Are you a wine guy or are you a beer dude?
Wine.
Wine. Excellent. All right. We have all 5 questions answered. Eloise, are you there? Do we have what our readers or what are readers?
Listeners, viewers.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Terrific. All right. Question number 1, age-old battle: dogs or cats? John answered with dogs. What did our readers say?
They knew John well. They answered dog.
Fantastic. Okay, question number 2, single crystal or matrix specimens? This was the most difficult question of the lot. So John
hesitation.
Single.
Hesitation there, but we had matrix specimens winning.
Oh, okay. Question number 3, covered tootsies, sandals or shoes? John went with sandals with no hesitation.
No hesitation as well for the audience. Sandals, 70%.
Question number 4, cabin in the mountains, cottage by the sea? Cottage by the sea was the correct answer. John chose it. What did our viewers say?
No, wrong. Cabin in the mountains, unfortunately.
Okay, the final question, wine or beer? John went with the red wine. It tastes so fine, it keeps them rocking all night long. What did the viewers say?
Beer. So I guess for those people who answered everything wrong, they know what to get John at the next show.
All right. So, John, I believe at the next mineral shows, they're going to get dogs and strap wine onto them and send them over to you, compliments of Mineral Talks Live.
I see. All right. It doesn't have to be red. It doesn't have to be red wine.
Red wine.
No, it doesn't have to be red wine. No, I just said wine.
Any wine. Okay. Thank you for the clarification. All right, we're going to go to Raquel and Eloise for any questions and answers. John, these are questions that our viewers have typed in during our interview, and they're hoping that you can answer it. So if you've got the time to hang around, we'd love to ask you some of these viewer questions.
Okay.
Well, Brian, we managed to get most of the questions in during the interview. We slipped some questions in. So I don't know, Raquel, if you saw anything else. That's what was asked.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Raquel's talking with her microphone off. She's just moving. There we go.
Yeah. Why don't you repeat it, because your hearing is better than mine.
Brian, you might want to go in the chat, in the Q&A, and see the question from Leslie.
No, it was already asked. We managed to ask it during the interview.
So I think that's it.
Eloise sent me that question, and I was able to work it into the interview. So
Okay.
we're good at what we do.
No, it was great, John. It was amazing. Like, thanks for sharing all of this info with us. You know, like, it looks like you were chatting with just the four of us when we had over 130 viewers. So a lot of people know the stories now.
It was a pleasure, believe me. It was a rare opportunity to, share a lot of my personal thoughts, and I am so grateful to Brian for making it possible.
Oh, thank you, John. But equal recognition is deserved by Raquel and Eloise. Without the two of them, we would not have the show happening. So,
really?
Well, and I remember now, we know that we'll have a video of John's collection that Brian is going to make in the near future. So that's
I can't wait. I can't wait.
Excellent.
All right, John, get that wine ready. I'm a-coming.
Okay, Brian, we have a wonderful guest bedroom, and you're invited to stay if you can manage that.
I love it. I love it. Okay, we're going to work this out. Hey, Eloise, I've got a question for you. You used to work at the Smithsonian. Any stories that you have about John's time as curator there, or any kind of influence you saw there based on what John had accomplished?
Well, I think that other people in the audience have better inputs for that. You know, I see that Tony Kemp is online. I see that Leslie Hill, who's works at the Smithsonian, is online as well. They have plenty of things to share. And I saw a few interactions as well in the chat. So, I know that Paul Powat, for example, is I've heard stories from Paul.
We didn't overlap, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I've heard stories still.
Yeah, well, Paul knows a few. Paul Powat, that is.
Yeah. Now, Raquel and Eloise, were there any conversations going on in the chat? And I'm doing this for the YouTube people who will not have a chance to read the chat. Are there any conversations that went on in the chat that would be interesting to share with later viewers?
Yeah, I don't know, Elo, but the one that got me is that everyone seems to enjoy being very proud of having the first issue of the MinRec. And some of them also got signed copies. So, yeah, a big congratulations.
So it was Peter Tarasov who said that he was holding in his hand the number one of the Min record while looking at the show. So
that's great.
a few things like that in the chat.
Yeah, that reminds me, if I may, I was invited up to the my memory is failing. Oh my gosh! The museum in the Copper Country, and
the Seaman.
I'm sorry.
The Seaman Museum.
Yes, I've lost it anyway. I was invited up there for an award, and in the introductory comments by John Jazik, he went on and on about how he handles the arrival of each copy of the Mineralogical Record. He sits down very comfortably and makes sure he has a good light. And he puts gloves on and all this sort of thing. That was quite precious. I really got a kick out of that.
I love that. Going back to Gail and Jim Spann for a second, I know that they have 2 subscriptions to the Mineralogical Record. One they read, and the second one they archive.
Oh, they're amazing. What can I say?
Yeah. And I'm very proud to say I am the only person probably in the entire state of Hawaii that has a complete set of the Mineralogical Record. Dave Bunk had a complete set that he was offering on sale, and I was able to buy that from him. So right now it's still in boxes because I'm cataloging it and I'm going to be putting it up in the office eventually. But very happy to know that I have a complete.
What about Peter Chin?
I don't think Peter has a complete collection, and Peter is he's only about 10 minutes from where I live, and so we're quite friendly and we know each other quite well.
Yeah, he's a wonderful guy.
He's a great guy. Yeah.
Brian, there is
out in your neck of the woods. I think I'm being admonished for taking up time and just chatting.
No. There is another comment I thought I could share. So Gene Spann is on the audience today, and he said, thanks for the commentary on the award, but this is a committee effort of anonymous members that they present. So just if you want to share that too, the award by the Spanns.
Say that again. It's an anonymous group?
Committee effort. So it's a committee. And the members, they are anonymous members who vote who will get the award.
Wonderful. And I see in the chat that they also corrected that they get 3 copies of the Mineralogical Record every month.
I'm sorry. I have to apologize. I had some difficulty understanding Raquel's comment or question.
She's saying that the John White Legacy Award that you had earned back in 2020, we were giving all the credit to Jim and Gail, and Jim and Gail had commented that it is a community effort. There is a community of anonymous people who are on the board who vote every year who receives that award. And I'm sorry to say I'm unaware of who got the 2022 one, because I think
Bob Cook.
2021 was skipped. But who got 2022?
Bob Cook.
Bob Cook. Well deserved as well. I love Bob. He was actually one of the first ones who ever reviewed What's Hot in Tucson program. So I have lots of great memories with Bob.
Yeah, well, he's a very funny guy.
Absolutely.
And then the Coleman family will get the next award in Denver. Well, they probably got it in Denver. I think that was to occur in Denver.
Nice. I wasn't aware of that. Raquel, were you aware of that? And if it didn't happen in Denver and it's supposed to happen in Tucson, well, John, you're the one who let the cat out of the bag.
Well, I'll be in Tucson too, by the way.
Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing you in Tucson. We're going to have a glass of wine together. Until then, that's going to be the end of our show today. For all of you viewers, tune back in next month. We're going to have another exciting show. And John, thank you again for being on the program and sharing your history with us. And thank you for everything that you've done for the mineral community.
Well, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure being your guest.
Thank you, John. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Aloha. Be good. We'll see you next month.